there isn't a microphone, so I'm really hoping everybody can hear me.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We got
Well, it's a small room and it's got nice acoustics. So we're going to talk about the 4/3 camera first, the AF100, and then we're going to go on to the 3D camera. So hopefully we're going to go fast, keep it entertaining. All right. So the large sensor camera is a 4/3 MOS imager. I'm going to come back and talk more about what that means as compared to CMOS. Basically, we're using this imager so that we can gain that shallow depth of field and make it adaptable to any number of different lenses. The total pixel count we've got is 12.4 million pixels, and there's 20 variable frame rates on the camera. It is a worldwide camera, being switchable to either 50 Hz or 60 Hz. It has uncompressed audio, and it uses AVC cam recording. I'm going to cover a lot of these issues as we go through the presentation, so hopefully we'll get the buzzwords all out there and you'll have some clue as to what they all mean when we're all done, okay? And of course, unheard of, but a 3-year warranty. Actually, it's not totally unheard of. Those guys that have AVC cam cameras have 3-year warranties, but all the other manufacturers aren't offering 3-year warranties, because one of the things that we found was that the reliability goes up exponentially once you remove the moving parts. All right, come on. Okay, so some people have called it a DSLR killer. I don't like to talk about it that way because that's not its purpose, that's not its inspiration. Its inspiration were all the guys that bought HPX 200s, HPX 170s, EX1s, and put 35mm adapters on the front and making the largest camera out of a small camera you could possibly make. All for the purpose of getting shallow depth of field. In the process of doing that, they also lost a good 2 stops of light. Well, that's pretty tough. When you're starting with a small imager in the first place, you know, I'm like, man, we got to do something. And then the opportunity just sort of opens up as far as having a physical plant that is able to make the larger chipset for us. The thing about the DSLRs, they have aliasing and moire, and I'll talk about that in a second. But as a video manufacturer, we know exactly what causes it and how to resolve it. And of course, we have all these customers that are out there, and I'm hoping I can pull back a whole bunch of customers that have bought DSLRs, and those DSLRs will go back into their camera bag and serve their purpose as a digital still camera. I mean, I have a D700, it's a fabulous camera, I wouldn't trade it out for the world, but I do believe that DSLRs as video cameras, there are a tremendous number of compromises. So that's where we're sort of targeting this camera into that independent filmmaking marketplace. So aliasing, this is actually the first time in the history of my doing this presentation, because of the fabulous projector that they provided me, yay, only 60 grand, I can actually show this aliasing that is happening on this building. It's very subtle. You might not see that in your viewfinder, but I can assure you, you put that up on a big screen, that is absolutely going to be there and will totally ruin that shot. You shoot it, you record it, you get it back into the edit suite, and you finally put it on a monitor big enough, you're going, oh God, what do I do? Same thing here. Notice all of this moire pattern that's happening. That too is something that's going to ruin the shot. That is going to definitely ruin the shot. What's happening is that there's all this resolution on the chipset. You know, you're looking at 3,000 lines of resolution on a DSLR. Well, 1080p only records 1080p. Okay? So now I've got all of this stuff that I've got to put into a 1920 by 1080 package, and it doesn't fit. And so what happens is it starts making this. It starts making stuff up. So what we did was we put an optical low-pass filter. Here's another example. One last one. Blow that up. Obviously, that's pretty unacceptable. This was actually a DSLR. And there is brick buildings with the AF-101 or the AF-100. You'll see the name of the camera go 101, 104, 102. It's all country designations by where their respective warranties are. But the camera is absolutely identical regardless of what the number is, okay? But the warranty is designated by the 101, which is in Europe. So here we have another potential for aliasing. Take a look. Here's what the DSLR has invented with what is just nubby fur. Okay? So he looks like a tiger instead of a little stuffed animal. The point is that what we want is to get away from that. So by putting an optical low-pass filter in, we've resolved that. And it's kind of hard to do because you're trying to keep a high resolution, but you got to keep the resolution down so that you don't end up with the aliasing, because you have so many pixels, it sort of creates this internal argument with the camera. A lot of people think that because we have this huge imager, 12 million pixels, my God, why don't you have 1,000 lines of resolution? It's because all those little pixels start creating issues all in of themselves. Okay, so here we have a 35 millimeter cinema film camera, and comparing that to the 17.3 imagery off of the 4/3 imager. Now that's what they're using in the GH1, GH2. That's the size off of that imager. We're using a slightly different mapping on the one we're using. Here we have 2/3 imager. If you just take a look, it is 4 times as large or 6 times as large. The reality is that when we start looking at this imager, not only is the imager the best in its class, and that translates to low skew. Because one of the things that people have noticed in like 5D, that if you make a swish pan, everything swishes with it, and it becomes problematic. I mentioned what is a MOS sensor. It's different. Here's a CMOS sensor, and the CMOS sensor is looking at a certain amount of light coming into the camera, and then there's signal leads that sort of boost and amplify back to the circuit. On a MOS sensor, we have a larger receptor area, and that allows us a greater dynamic range on the camera. And having the 2 leads allows us to have a greater sensor area, which is more similar to what you might experience off of a CCD. So similar to a CMOS in that it is still a rolling shutter, but different in as much as how we're getting light into the camera and how we're controlling it, and how quickly it can actually scan so that we resolve the skew issues. So here's 4/3 imager. Okay, so here's my 4/3 sensor, and it really is not, that arrow's not going all the way over here. We're using a 17.8 millimeters and by 10. And over here, we're 17.3. So we're using a different mapping of the chipset itself. And even if they were the exact same chipset between the GH2 and the AF100, the fact that we map it different is its first step away. And from that point, it completely steps away. The 2 cameras are absolutely nothing alike. So the micro 4/3 versus 4/3, these 2 imagers are exactly the same size. There's no difference between them. The difference is primarily what happens behind the lens, and that's the depth between the image-taking surface here or here. Okay, so if anybody's familiar with a single lens reflex camera, you know that the image is going to come in through the lens and it's going to hit a mirror. That mirror is going to translate up through a viewfinder, and you're going to be able to look at the image up here. Then when you snap the button, it flips the mirror up out of the way and it takes a picture against the imager. That's what happens in a 4/3 camera. There's a mirror in there, and it flips up out of the way. So the flange back depth, or this depth between the last element of the lens and the picture-taking surface, is much deeper. So when we talk about putting 4/3 lenses onto this micro 4/3 mount, we end up having to use an adapter to space it appropriately away so that it covers the entire imagery. One of those lenses that is a Panasonic lens, we have, it's a fairly inexpensive lens, and I was talking to one gentleman this evening, and people are looking at this lens. It's a fairly slow lens, but it does a couple of things that are unique that might be appropriate for what you've got to shoot. If it doesn't, don't buy it. It has a couple of things that it does. It does face recognition, so if you got walking, talking talent, what a cool thing. It will autofocus on your talent. It has an image stabilizer. And of all of the still image lenses, it has the quietest autofocus out of the entire batch. Now I've got some slides to show all of the lenses. The reality is that this lens is a nice little lens. It's actually fairly sharp. For $850, it's not a bad deal. The gentleman that I was talking to said, well, Jim, why doesn't Panasonic make a 2.8? Because it would cost $2,000. The factory that makes this lens is making the lens for the GH2. It's a fairly inexpensive consumer level camera. They know that they would not have the ability to sell a $2,000 lens. Well, there's all this professional group. Folks, we are such a small pool of people. I mean, I feel like we're a big pool of people. I mean, I go to NAB and I see 100,000 of my closest friends all the time. But that's a very small number for a consumer factory to consider. So what other lenses are out there? There's lots of them, believe me. I'll mention a couple as we go through the presentation, okay? These are the compatible Panasonic lenses. You will find a nice chart on our AF100 resources webpage that talk about what are the limitations of these lenses. Keep in mind, they're still image lenses. They have focus motors. They have zoom motors. Although that they don't have a servo zoom, when you start zooming the lens, there's motors on the inside of that lens that are tracking that lens along the zoom, and it makes noise. There are iris motors. So some of the less expensive lenses are going to be tick, 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 tick. So if you're on a soundstage, you probably would hear it. But if you're in a live room, you probably wouldn't hear it if you had your microphone over on your talent. So just be aware that the still image lenses are probably limited in some of their applications, but some of them are pretty nice, like this little 20mm f1.7. Pretty nice. Its autofocus is noisy. I'll give you that right straight up. That chart that I talked about says all that stuff. Okay, so be aware that still image lenses aren't always the end-all and be-all. Now, I happen to think that there's lots of manual lenses that are out there, and we'll come to that in a second. But if you take a look at the Olympus lenses, Olympus has a nice group of micro 4/3 lenses that are fairly new, and they are quiet, and they talk to the camera, and they do the foot readout and the iris and autofocus and all that stuff. They do all of that stuff, and they talk to the camera. So those tend to be a little bit more expensive. There's a set of 4/3 lenses from Olympus. Again, those are going to be tick, 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 tick. But there's one there that is an f2.8, which is a pretty nice lens. It's like an 18 to 35. Pretty nice. So the fact is that the micro 4/3 mount means that virtually any lens can be mounted to it. So there's a PL lens adapter, 4/3 lens adapter. We just covered why that means 4/3 versus micro 4/3. Olympus, Canon, another Canon, Leica M, Yashica, Nikon, Pentax. There's tons of them. I want to say that if you went to eBay and you did a search on micro 4/3 to lens du jour, you might find, like I did on the Nikon, that there's 180 possibilities. I want to warn you that just because it doesn't mean that it's good. Okay? I spent $40 on one that doesn't hold the lens solid. I almost dismounted one of my lenses on the floor. Okay? So I tend to spend a little bit more for that adapter, because then you're going to be a little bit more secure in what your lens is doing. Granted, there is no communication with the camera, but that's what you got a waveform monitor and zebras. They'll tell you whether or not you got the right exposure. A lot of people, and I had a conversation today, earlier on the phone, with a gentleman that says, well, I just want a camera that doesn't have the crop factor. You know, I don't want to I want to take my 50mm lens and stick it on the camera and have it be a 50mm lens. And I said, well, you know, it's pretty easy with this particular camera because the math is absolutely sublime. You cut it in half. So if you need a 50mm look, then put a 25 on it. Okay? Just because still camera lenses are designed for 35mm still cameras, and it's a 2x factor. There's a couple of different programs out there. My favorite happens to be PCAM or Match Lens. Match Lens is available for both Droid and iPhones, but the PCAM, I believe, is strictly an iPhone arena. Nonetheless, it has a nice program that will, you put in what lens you're using on what particular item or what particular camera, and you tell it, I want to go to the AF100, what lens do I need to get that same field of view? They'll tell you. So it's actually pretty straightforward as far as trying to figure out what you're going to use.
Is that a free app?
No. The PCAM is the more expensive of the two. I think the Match Lens was $14.95. The PCAM, because it does so many things. The PCAM I use at every single trade show in the world. Yes?
Actually, there's a website, and I keep it in my favorites on my phone, and it's free. And it does the exact same thing. It lets you plug in, and I'll tell you what it is in 2 seconds. Okay.
Well, I'll keep talking over while you do that. One of the things that the PCAM does is it calculates for you, let's say that you have, your subject is 15 feet away. I'm using this particular lens, again, this particular size imager. What is my field of view going to look like? I get this question a lot because we had guys come in from a church. Yeah, my camera's back there at 75 feet, and I got this length of lens, and what's my image going to be? And I go, well, like that. Okay, good, great. So it does a lot of different things.
It's called DOFmaster.com.
DOFmaster, so Depth of Field Master.
Depth of Field Master, and they have the same calculator on there. You plug in the camera type. Now, it doesn't have AF100, but it has GH1, which...
Basically, if you're...
It's 2 times. It's still 2 times.
The thing is that does it give you the ability to choose whether it's a 178 or a 185?
If I remember correctly. I can't log on. There's no internet in here.
Yeah, this is kind of a dark field.
But if I remember right, I know that you can, you plug in the distance from the subject, let's say, and yeah, actually I think you can put in the speed of the lens also.
Well, I'm thinking of the aspect ratio. Just because the aspect ratio is going to change, you know, what lens you use is going to change by virtue of it being a 16 by 9 or a 4
Right.
by 3.
At the moment, I don't remember, but
Take a look at it.
It's free.
It's free, exactly.
It's free.
But the other two also work, and they do lots of other things as well. Okay, so various lenses. So someone told me that they actually have mounted a C-mount 16mm movie film lens on this. But the mount actually goes back into the body of the camera. So they said that they could do it. Again, they found it on eBay. But basically we're looking at 20 millimeters inside the body of the camera itself. So everything else is bringing the lens out. So notice we have different size adapters. So there's my NovoFlex. I love my NovoFlex. My NovoFlex actually will engage the iris on my Nikon, and that blue ring allows me to stop it down as a gradual stop down using the iris within the lens itself. You know, and one of the biggest problems in working with still image lenses is they have click stops on the f-stops, and so it's like you don't get a nice gradual stop down. But the NovoFlex will allow me to do that. But they come in all different shapes, sizes, and prices. I know around here, B&H has umpteen gazillion of them over there. If you want to go check it out, or Able Cinetech has a bunch of them that you can go check out. But it is something that will allow you to work with whatever lenses you may already own, or lenses that you may wish to rent. There is a couple of lenses that have some unique properties. The Voigtlander is probably the most heavily backordered lens out there. It's a super fast 50mm 1.1, and it has a brother that's a 0.95, I think. He's on the next slide. Yeah. So the thing is that they're fairly inexpensive. The glass is pretty good. They are suffering a little bit of a backorder, but all of these lenses can be put onto the camera. There is an EOS adapter for some lenses, for the Canon lenses, made by Kaipon, and they actually have an iris built into the adapter, which I think it's kind of odd. I've seen mixed reviews on the particular adapter, but know that the iris is happening inside the adapter, whereas your EOS lenses, normally they would talk to the camera and the camera would stop it down. But there is one coming from Berger Engineering. It's a little on the pricey side, $700, but it will take the electronics of all the EOS lenses and have it communicate directly with the camera. So the little iris knob on the side of the camera will stop down the iris. It will have a full conversation. It will do autofocus. It will do all those things that it normally does. There are a couple of lenses that do have a little bit of extra power, and I'm sure in their documentation they have defined which lenses those are. They're probably the really long zooms. But the point being is that this is going to start being available at the end of this month. My buddy over at Zeiss has not yet sent me his picture. This is the prototype 4/3 mount that they have for the prime lens, the compact primes. You can order them directly so that they attach directly to the camera if you choose. The reason to do that just makes it real easy. You don't have to worry about shimming the PL mount. But if you were looking to buy a set of compact primes and possibly rent them out in the process, I would probably buy the PL mount adapter and buy them as PL mount. Did you have a question?
Yeah, what's the lens retail for and approximate rental cost?
The lens, this particular lens is a 50mm lens. It's about $3,600. But you can get a whole set of compact primes. I think there's 7 lenses in the set for 23 or 24 or something like that. I think if you went to Able, you can take a look at that on their website. They showed the entire package. There are a number of different PL adapters. This is not a PL adapter. It's their prototype. But there are PL adapters, one from Hot Rod Cameras, Burns & Sawyer, MTF Services, and there's a number, right now I think there's about 5 more that are going to be shown at NAB, so not breaking those confidences, but stay tuned. There's going to be lots of stuff being shown for this camera. This is the Hot Rod Cameras PL mount. Look at the size of this lens. It's a monster. I have to say, we're going to have something like that on one of our cameras at NAB. It looks amazing. It looks amazing. I'm just amazed that a $5,000 camera can look so unbelievable. Unbelievable. Anyhow, this is a Fujinon zoom. I think this is the Allura lens that is available from Zeiss. So the camera has 2 personalities. There's a video cam mode, there's a film cam mode, and variable frame rate works over here in film cam mode because that's a film camera. Synchro scan, you can have it in either degrees or seconds, either in film cam mode or degrees, but let me just point out one critical difference, and Dave, you can give the lessons on this over to the side when we're all done, but degrees are not the same thing as seconds. Because when you start going into variable frame rates, your motion blur you want to keep the same. Be in degrees, or else you're going to change the way the blur looks from your variable frame rate to your 24p, okay? So that's just one critical little issue. I'm still trying to find the perfect slide that helps me describe that better, but that means it probably won't happen until after NAB, because I'm kind of busy right now. Anyhow, all of this stuff will show up in the viewfinder if you so have a lens that talks to the camera. Sensitivity. Over on the video cam, you start at -6 dB, go to 3 dB, 0, 9, 12, 18. Okay? Then you're out of luck. Over in the film cam mode, I can go start at 200 ISO and start bringing it up to, I think I got 280, 360, no, 200, 360, 340, 600, anyhow, goes all the way up to 3200. Gives you a lot more latitude to work with, and the way that they handle the gain is not exactly the same. You know, those of us that have been shooting with video cameras for years, you know that there's a penalty to pay. You know, I hadn't found that penalty up until about 1600 ISO. So just keep in mind, if you're finding yourself rocking a hard spot, try the film cam side. It certainly will give you a little more latitude. There are about 10 stops of latitude in the camera from what we've tested. And the folks that we sent our frame grab to DSC labs, and they said, looks like about 10 stops to us too. You know, so. Variable frame rates, you have different frame rates depending on whether you're 50 hertz or 60 hertz, and certainly this chart, which is probably too small for anybody to see, the point is there are 20 of them. Keep in mind, over here, you need to make sure that your variable frame rate is turned off, and I think I got a slide that follows this that talks about it. But this dial select right here, you can lock that dial so that it doesn't do anything except stay locked, okay? And it's a good thing because if you happen to be in variable frame rate, your audio meters are going to be still moving, but it's not going to be recording audio. The good news is, it does give you this red slash through your recording. If you come across someone that does not have a red slash there, tell them they just need to update their camera, because there is a firmware update that does do that. Okay. The film camera comes in 10 degrees out to 360 in 0.5 degree divisions, except for this very odd one right here. But he's there for working against computer screens, and he needed to be there. But in video cam, I also have slow shutter speeds down here. So if I want to do that blurry stuff that happens, it's kind of cool and sort of creative. Keep in mind, it's over on the video cam side. I do get a series of phone calls. That's a popular question. You can design looks with the camera. You can go in and into the individual scene files. These are the standard ones that come with the camera. Some people have made the mistake thinking because they have an HMC 150 or an HVX 200 that there is an absolute correlation from one camera to another. There isn't. Absolutely not. So just because this works under fluorescent doesn't mean it's going to look like the fluorescent setting on your HMC 150. The major reason being is the chipset is absolutely different. The digital signal processing is absolutely different. So don't make that mistake. If you're trying to match the camera to an HMC 150, get out a vector scope and match it. Because you can absolutely go through and make them match, and then you can save it into the scene file so it's there forever and ever. You can actually offload it to an SD card and take it to the next camera and load it into the next camera and load it into the next camera. You do have a lot of image control here, color phase, saturation, detail coring. If you don't really understand the settings, do minor settings. I mean, I've seen guys do some real weird stuff out on the internet, like they'll have detail at -7 and coring at +7, and they don't have any idea what coring does. Coring resolves the noise that happens when you add detail. So now it's having to do something, and it's not very flattering. Okay? So don't make great big variations like that. Work for, little platitudes in between while you dial it in to make it look the way you want it to. Gamma curves, a lot of them are in there. Some are more interesting than others. I happen to like the setting like D for working in a film relationship because it tends to give the flattest overall image. But you have to be very, very careful about underexposing by half a stop because you can blow out the highlights and lose all your detail. So as long as you set your zebras for like 95, then that's going to give you ample pre-warning that you're getting close, right? But it also can be a little noisier than others. So it's a number of different things. Here we have black press, which I think is probably the one that most people don't understand. It basically is compressing the blacks in the bottom end of the picture. And if somebody's trying to match a Canon 5D, that's exactly where I'd start. Because if you look at the 5D pictures, they got compressed blacks. Start there. Now you don't have to drop your pedestal below what would be a legal signal. Or if you're trying to get a little punch on a foggy day, it might be a good setting. A lot of guys have been finding the HD norm works very well, but the point being, play with it. If all goes wrong, you can always reset the camera to its factory reset. Very easy. It's in the camera. It does do uncompressed 48 kilohertz 16-bit audio in the PH mode. Any of the other modes, it will only do the Dolby recording. And it's a menu selection. You have to dial it up. It's not automatic. XLRs, lots of controls. Here's my audio output so I can play. XLR inputs, they are line mic switchable and they will supply phantom power. Monitoring, These do not look like high-def images. It looks really good on those other projectors, though. Point is that you can set up the output to be whatever you want it to be, so that if you are trying to send out a squeezed, so that you are going to send out squeeze to another recording device that is going to take your signal and record it into 2398, like I want to send it to an HD cam, or I want to send it to AVC Intra over 2398. I can do that, and then once it's on my timeline, bring it in as a 16:9. Simultaneous output for HDMI and HD SDI, but I'm either going to turn off the viewfinder or the LCD, because I can't have both HD SDI and these two devices running at the same time. So it really depends on where you need to select your output. Keep in mind there is no variable frame rate if the output is selected at 2398. Somebody wanted me to put the thing into variable frame rate tonight. One of my fumbling around was, okay, it's still not going into variable frame rate, so I had to go back into find the menu to turn this on. It does do still captures, but they are at 2 megapixels. It's not a still image camera. Once it hits that optical low-pass filter, the resolution is no longer there. Even though there's 12 million pixels backing it up, I don't have that kind of selection. If indeed I want to play back the pictures taken with the camera, I hit the mode select and then slot select to review. It'll give me a choice of video or my still images. It does do pre-record and an intervalometer. The pre-record, everybody knows what pre-record is here? Yeah, okay, good. It does pre-record 3 seconds, which should be more than ample to get your shot. Keep in mind though, if you are in pre-record, you're in record, and so it's not going to do a black balance for you. It'll be one of those crazy making things, like I keep trying to black balance, I keep trying to black balance, and it's not working. If it's in pre-record, like any camera that's in record, you're not going to be able to get it to black balance. Or put it into variable frame rate. There's different aspect ratio markings in the viewfinder. 90% is basically against your 16:9, 235, 185, 14:9, and 4:3. And then there's a little grid for working in sort of a graphics arena, is the way I see it. It does have color bars and 1,000 hertz tone. High-res viewfinder, real solid there. Waveform monitor, vector scope, it also has zebras. The zebras go one way in zebra 1, zebra 2 goes the other way. They are fully adjustable. So you set those up the way you want to. It does have this little focus hook here, so if you want to, if you calibrated the PL lenses, those focus markings on the side of the barrel will absolutely be correct. Relay recording, it goes from one card to the next card automatically. I cannot hot swap, because the minute I open up the little door, the camera stops functioning. So just keep that in mind. It does have a focus bar. See this little green bar? If I focus, it's going to grow long and give that green at the longest point or at the focus point. Once I've passed the focus point, the white part fades back. What that says is, right where that green dot is your focus point. You can also use the focus in red, which I find to be absolutely fabulous. Somebody says, well, what if I have a model in a red dress in a red room? Take the color out of your viewfinder, it'll still be red, okay? And you'll be able to focus it. It does have dynamic range stretch, and like with all dynamic range stretches in all of our cameras, if it doesn't have anything to do, it's not going to be your friend. It will be your friend if it's got something to occupy its time, which is having to control a highlight that's too high and a shadow that's too low. It will bring both of them together. Basically, it's looking at 4,096 areas of the picture, and it's doing a continuous comparison from one to the next to the next to the next. Had a filmmaker do a film because he was working in the more is better mode, and unfortunately more than half of his footage is totally unusable because it's too noisy. DRS didn't have anything to do that day. So be aware, it can be your friend, use it, and then get rid of it. Oops. Okay. Gain settings, 6 dB to 18, film cam 200 to 3200. Normal sensitivity on the camera is 320. Okay. It does do metadata recording, and as more and more software manufacturers figure out how to address that metadata, it will become even more powerful in ABC Cam. Right now there's only a couple guys, I refer you to Imagine Products, where they can archive your footage and help you search the metadata. Because you can go in and identify certain things in the clip, and it will be recorded in the clip for eternity. Face detection, like that 14140 lens. My little function button is just like the coolest little function button in the whole world. We're going to come back to him a couple of times. But I can set him up to be focus area, iris area, luminance area, focus and iris, focus and Y-get. It basically will allow me to move these little squares around so that I can tell it to autofocus on this part of the picture. Okay? Or tell me what the luminance level is on that part of the picture. So it gives me a readout, like right here. My readout is 37% based on where that little indicator is.
But it tells you percent, not necessarily.
Yeah, it gives you a percentage of yours, with 100 being 100 IRE and 37 you're at 37 IRE, basically. It has built-in neutral density filters, 2 manual black and white balance sets, and a preset. Now, I'm going to go back to that function button for 1 second. I go 3200K, 5600K, and the next one is variable. Using my function button, I can increment from 2400K all the way up to 9900K in 100 degrees at a time. It's pretty cool. User buttons are fully programmable to functions of your choice. You can actually program them to do nothing. The face detect is for that face recognition if you're using the 14140 lens. Focus assist, the camera comes programmed to have that on user 1. That's that focus on red function. And then everything else is kind of like, what else do I want? I might want to do shot mark if I'm working with a smart edit system that recognizes that. Or I might want to do a capture, still image capture, functions. All right. Inputs and outputs, your choice. It is a 422 8-bit output on the HDSDI. HDMI is always live. But keep in mind, it does not have timecode. Timecode is not part of the HDMI spec, and so that might go to one of these nice inexpensive viewfinders that are out there, or small monitors, and then you use your HDSDI for something else. The battery is the same battery that works with all of our HMC 150s, the 40s, the 80s. It's a smart battery. The battery that comes with it is not the VW VBG6 or 6G. It's a different one, but that one is not available here other than coming in the box. Talk us a little bit about ABC HD, because this actually is going to lead us into working with the 3D camera as well, because they both work in ABC HD. Starting with MPEG-2, back here in 1995, it's a long group of pictures, and as the MPEG-2 committee gathered, they felt that they could do a whole lot better than MPEG-2, and they started on MPEG-4. By the time they get to 2005, they have stylized to ABC H.264 and ready for prime time in video recording. what we've done with AVC HD, we've made what we call a moniker that talks about AVC cam, and AVC cam, the way we encode it, the way we wrap it, is not necessarily what everybody else does. A lot of people have come up to me and say, well, you know, that Canon 5D is using H.264 at 40 megabits. It has to look better than AVC cam. That's not true. That's not true. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. Anyhow, we have a lot of different things that are happening here. It goes up to 24 megabits. You'll sometimes see it at 21. Point is, it's 1920 by 1080, 1280 by 720. Here we got the full raster, but it's only 17 megabits, and it's interlace only, interlace only. Frankly, I think anybody that's using this camera, I don't think they're ever going to go here. I mean, there might be, but I don't know of too many people that I've talked to that are interested in doing interlace recording at this point. Okay, but look at the time you can get on a 16 gig card. I got 90 minutes, 180 minutes, 6 hours, and I got 2 cards inside this camera. This is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It does work with SDHC and SDXC. Before you use the SDXC on your PCs, folks, check it out, check it out. You might have to update your PC, okay? Because SDXCs are not compatible with all the computers that are out there. You might have to get a SDXC adapter and do a little plug-in patch from Microsoft in order to get the computer to read it. Just know. But you can get 32 gigs in an SDHC card, so so far it's not a problem for me because my computer doesn't recognize SDXC yet. So anyhow, just keep that in mind. When we start talking about comparing intraframe to long groups of pictures, this is kind of what we do in MPEG-2, but in MPEG-2 we don't have nearly as many bidirectional frames. In AVC HD, our implementation, there are 2 bidirectional frames for every I frame. There's 2 bidirectional frames for every P frame. AVC HD is a content adaptive codec. Okay? It's content adaptive. It's looking at what's being recorded or what's being compressed. It's looking before and it's looking after, and it's compressing this frame. You'll note whenever you're working with any of these cameras, there'll be like a hair-second delay in it turning off. Okay? You've seen that, right? It's finishing its file because it has to finish its comparison and then stop. Okay? The reality is that it is always looking backward 1 frame and always looking forward 1 frame in order to make sure that just the changes are being recorded. And that's what makes this codec so incredibly efficient. It looks way better than it has a right to, in my opinion. Here's like a first pass. Here's my picture, first pass, okay? Take off a whole bunch of meat there, but now I go to the second pass. Come on. I need to change my battery maybe. Okay, so let's take a close-up of our first pass. Notice she's turned into a lot of blocks. But what happens is that the codec is going, I'm going to assign 4x4 blocks to this area, 8x8 blocks to that area, 16x16s to that area. So let's just play compression engine here. Well, this is definitely a 16x16, and this down here looks like 4x4 because there's lots of details there. There's lots of details here. So it's allocating its bandwidth across the picture instead of always making everything 8x8. And the reason it does that is for the betterment of the image. Take a look at what happens in HDV. This is ABC HD PH mode. HDV at 24 megabits. This is, or 25 megabits. This is 24 megabits. Notice we've gotten macro blocking going on here. This is because it's not content adaptive. It's not assigning bandwidth. It's just saying, okay, everything is 8 by 8. Regardless, that's what's going to happen. And so we end up with a lot of macro blocking. I do see a little bit of something going on down here, maybe a little bit of something up here, but I could still use this. I don't know that I could use this. Here's an uncompressed picture. And again, now we're going to, here's HD 35 megabits. This is a XDCam EX. And notice the stair-stepping that we've got over here, and the pretty ugly nature of this down in here, and all over her eyes. It's a little softer, but notice I don't have a stair-stepping along her arm. When you start comparing XDCam EX versus ABC Cam, our implementation, just because there's lots of megabits doesn't necessarily mean that it's better, okay? Because we're working in a variable discrete cosine transform, that's that 4x4, 8x8, 16x16. There's a couple of other various sizes in there. There's an 8x16, there's a 4x8. And the thing is that it does a little deep blocking filter to keep from having a stair-steppy edge. So, Barry Green did an experiment with the HMR10. He took the Sony XDCam camera, the EX1, took the HDSDI output and sent it to the HMR10, which is in the back of the room. Take a look at what happens. Macro block, no macro block. Macro block, no macro block. Okay? One's 35 megabits, but the one that's doing a better job is not. It's only 24. So why ABC Cam and not ABC Intra? Frankly, it's all about the cost of the camera, the cost of the codec cards, the cost of everything. If we had put it into ABC Intra and P2 cards, the camera would have cost around $10,000, and then you had to add P2 cards. So if you need that higher bit level of recording, you can certainly use your choice of a lot of different flavors. There's lots of the external record devices out there, and you can get those for a lot less than $5 grand. All right, come on. Uh-oh. You can remove the handle. And the side handle to make the thing a little bit smaller. There's a guy that came up with a little 2-foot helicopter to put it on. I got some really cool footage. Unfortunately, that footage didn't make it to my presentation tonight. But, you know, he's weaving amongst the masts in a seaport. It's pretty cool.
As long as he knows how to land.
Oh, yeah. It had me scared. Splash. It does have lots of beautiful styling to it. I happen to think it's a gorgeous little camera, and again, it has that 3-year warranty. Any questions on the AF100? Yes, Dan?
I wouldn't say it's a question, but I wanted to mention that one thing this camera does that I don't know of any other camera that does it is it does 1080 60p.
Yes, in the variable frame rates, it does all of its variable frame rates in 1080. Thanks for bringing that up. I get immune to all of the cool things that it does. So yes, at 1080 it does 60p overcrank, and there isn't another camera that we offer that does that. Good point. Yes.
Just wondering, how is this? Are people using this for ENG style shooting, or is it really for cinematography?
ENG shooting, if you can figure out how to get past the fact that there isn't a zoom, motor zoom. Yeah. Able Cinetech does have a setup that you could indeed apply that to the camera, apply power to it so that you could have a zoom lens on it. If you go check out on the Able Cinetech site, you can see it. It is fairly pricey because it's using a couple of things that are out there already. one being the Phantom, the PL adapter, but it certainly is able to do that. Yes?
If the millions of pixels, trying to squeeze that down into the 1080 lines is what creates the aliasing problem, why don't they just put a imaging sensor in there with 1080 lines in it?
Well, it's getting a 2 megapixel imager that is that large. Making an imager is a $5 million thing.
Okay.
So trying to figure out how to get there without having to invent the wheel. The wheel's already been invented.
Great, thanks.
Can you elaborate on face recognition? It's not autofocus.
Okay, so it's an autofocus function, and I dial in, I tell it to do facial recognition. The camera then looks at this T, eyes and nose, and it tracks that. There's 2 modes. One is for multi-faces, so that there's more than one face, or there's one face. Okay? That's a fairly reasonable job.